Consider two people, one named Luke and the other Oscar. These two have different thoughts on investing. Luke buys a rental property, Oscar puts the same money into index funds. Both think they made the smarter choice. But emotions and math are very different things, my friends. And when you actually run the numbers over 20 years, the difference is far clearer than you might think. Let's keep this fair, folks. Both Luke and Oscar have saved up $75,000. Both earn $80,000 a year. Same age, same city, same financial starting point. The only difference is what they do with that $75,000. Luke uses it as a 20% down payment on a $375,000 rental property, a modest three-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. He takes out a 30-year mortgage at 6.33% interest. Monthly mortgage payment comes out to roughly $1,860. He finds a tenant willing to pay $2,300 a month in rent. On paper, before spending another dime, that's $440 of profit a month. Luke feels like a genius. Oscar puts the same $75,000 into a total stock market index fund. No leverage, no tenants, no keys to hand over. He sets up a $300 automatic monthly contribution and never thinks about it again. His coworkers ask him what he's investing in. Index funds, he says. They nod politely and change the subject. Nobody is impressed. On day one, Luke has a house, a tenant, and a story to tell at dinner. Oscar has a brokerage account and a confirmation email. In terms of how it feels, there's no comparison. But math and emotions are very different things, my friends. In the first few years, Luke is living the justified dream of being a landlord. Rent checks hit his account on the first of every month. He drives past his property on the way to work and thinks, I own this. He claims mortgage interest and depreciation on his taxes, knocking a few $1,000s off his tax bill every year. He's building equity with every mortgage payment. He watches similar homes in the neighborhood rise in value. Everything about this investment feels real, tangible, and smart. Oscar, meanwhile, logs into his brokerage account every 3 months and sees the number go up a little, then down a little, then up a little more. Year 1, his $75,000 grows to about $80,000. Year 2, maybe $71,000. It feels like nothing is happening to Oscar. No key in his pocket, no tenant texting him, no asset he can point to through his car window, just a number on a screen. Luke's friends ask him about his property. Oscar's friends ask him nothing. Social proof alone makes Luke feel like he's miles ahead. Let's look at the numbers through year 3, folks. Luke collected about $82,800 in rent. Mortgage payments totaled roughly $66,960. That leaves $15,840 in gross cash flow. Looks great until you subtract everything else. Property taxes run about $3,000 a year. Insurance adds another $1,500. Luke replaced a water heater for $1,200, fixed a leaking roof for $2,800, and dealt with a vacancy period between tenants that lasted 1 month, $1,800 in lost rent plus $600 in cleaning and relisting costs. Property management? Luke manages it himself to save money, but that means phone calls at 11 p.m., showings on weekends, and coordinating repairs on his lunch breaks. After all real costs are deducted, Luke's actual net cash flow over 3 years is somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. Not the $15,840 gross that looked so good on paper, and that doesn't count a single hour of his time. Oscar, meanwhile, has put in $75,000 plus $10,800 in monthly contributions. With roughly 10% average annual returns, his portfolio has reached approximately $112,000. 0 hours lost, 0 phone calls, 0 emergencies. But Luke still has leverage working in his favor. His $375,000 property appreciated at roughly 3 to 4% a year and is now worth approximately $430,000 to $440,000. His equity, the gap between what the home is worth and what he owes, has grown to around $55,000 to $65,000. That's real wealth, and it came partly from using the bank's money. That's the power of leverage, and it's the one advantage equity investors can't easily replicate. The rent check is the number everyone talks about, folks. What nobody talks about is everything that comes out before you actually keep that rent check. Vacancies. The average rental property sits empty about 1 month per year. That's not a disaster, but it's a full mortgage payment to cover with zero income. When a tenant leaves, you're paying for cleaning, minor, repairs, listing fees, and your own time to screen and show the place, maintenance and repairs. The general rule is to budget 1 to 2% of the property's value annually for upkeep. On a $375,000 home, that's $3,750 to $7,500 a year. Some years it's a $200 faucet fix. Other years it's an $8,000 AC replacement in August that you didn't see coming and couldn't delay because your tenant was threatening to leave. Capital expenditures. Roofs last 20 to 25 years, furnaces 15 to 20, water heaters 10 to 12. These are guaranteed future costs and they arrive in $5,000 to $15,000 chunks. If you're not setting money aside every month for them, you're not running a business, you're gambling. Property management. If Luke hires a manager, that's immediately 8 to 10% of monthly rent, roughly $150 to $180 a month. If he manages it himself, he's doing a part-time job without a salary. Either way, there's a cost. And there's one more risk nobody likes to think about, folks: bad tenants. A tenant who stops paying and knows the eviction process can cost 3 to 6 months of lost rent plus legal fees. That single event can wipe out an entire year's profit or more. None of this shows up in the $440 monthly cash flow figure, but it can still happen. By year 5, Luke is deeply immersed in the reality of being a landlord. He's on his third tenant. He replaced the roof for $8,500, dealt with a plumbing emergency that cost $1,400, and left the property vacant for a month between tenants. He raised the rent to $1,950, which helps, but property taxes and insurance have also gone up. His actual cash return, what actually stays in his pocket after all real expenses, is running at 3 to 5%. Not bad, but not the 15 to 20% return he tells his friends about at the barbecue. Oscar is still doing absolutely nothing, folks. His portfolio grew from $75,000 to roughly $195,000 to $210,000 by year 7, with those steady $300 monthly contributions. He picked no stocks. He timed no market. He did nothing except leave it alone. Compound growth is starting to accelerate. Gains on top of gains are now generating more new wealth each year than his original contributions ever did. Here's what's actually happening. Luke's wealth is growing, but slowly after expenses, and it demands constant attention. Oscar's wealth is growing exponentially slowly at first, then faster and faster. Compound growth is boring for the first 5 years and astonishing for the next 15. By year 10, Luke's property is worth roughly $350,000 to $365,000. Remaining mortgage balance is about $166,000. That puts his equity at around $185,000 to $200,000. After subtracting every real cost over 10 years, mortgage interest, taxes, insurance, repairs, vacancies, capital expenditures, Luke's total out-of-pocket spending beyond his original down payment is somewhere between $20,000 and $35,000. Oscar's portfolio, with steady $300 monthly contributions and roughly 10% average annual returns, is sitting at approximately $230,000 to $250,000. He put in a total of $75,000 upfront plus $36,000, in contributions $111,000 total. Everything else is pure compound growth, and he didn't spend a single weekend fixing anything. In year 10, Luke may be slightly ahead thanks to leverage. But here's the thing, folks. Luke also spent hundreds of hours managing his property, took on hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and concentrated his entire investment in a single asset in a single zip code. Oscar is spread across thousands of companies and hasn't lost a single night of sleep. This is where the story truly diverges, my friends. By year 20, Luke's property is worth roughly $475,000 to $520,000. The mortgage is paid off or nearly so. His equity sits somewhere between $430,000 and $480,000 depending on appreciation. He collected rent the entire time, but after 20 years of maintenance, repairs, tenant turnover, taxes, insurance, and at least one major renovation, his total net profit from cash flow above and beyond what he spent may be $45,000 to $85,000. Maybe more in a hot market, maybe less in a flat one. Oscar's portfolio, with $300 monthly contributions and 10% average annual returns, has reached approximately $710,000. Over 20 years, he put in a total of $147,000 in contributions. The remaining $563,000 is pure compounding. No debt, no tenants, no phone calls about a broken pipe at 2 a.m. When you compare net worth, Oscar is ahead by a meaningful margin. Luke did well with leverage and tax advantages, but Oscar ended up with roughly 40 to 50% more, and he did it with zero management burden. And here's the part that makes the math even more dramatic, folks. If Oscar increases his monthly contribution by just $200, bumping it to $500, his 20-year portfolio jumps to approximately $847,000. Because in the stock market, increasing your contributions has a multiplier effect through compounding. In real estate, scaling up typically means buying another property, taking on another mortgage, and doubling your workload. If I only show the downsides of real estate, folks, I'm doing exactly what every stock market influencer does. Equities have real risks that people love to ignore. Volatility is brutal. In 2008, the market dropped roughly 37%. In March 2020, it dropped 34% in a single month. If Oscar had $400,000 in his portfolio and watched it fall to $200,000 in a matter of weeks, that's not just a number on a screen. That's gut-wrenching. And the data is clear. Most investors panic sell during crashes and buy back in after the recovery, locking in losses at the worst possible time. No cash flow. Unlike a rental property, index funds don't send you a monthly check you can spend. There are dividends, but in a total market fund, you're looking at roughly 1.5 to 2% yield. No leverage. Oscar used $75,000 to control $75,000 in assets. Luke used $75,000 to control $375,000 in assets. That's 5-to-1 leverage, powerful when property values rise. And it's the main reason real estate has created more millionaires than the stock market in many studies. And no tax magic like depreciation. Real estate investors can deduct the theoretical decline in a building's value from their taxable income even while the property is actually appreciating. That's a legal tax shelter equity investors can't access. Real estate wins in specific identifiable situations, folks. If you're in a market where the rent-to-price ratio is strong, where monthly rent is at least 0.8 to 1% of the purchase price, the cash flow math works in your favor from day one. If you're willing to treat it as a real business rather than a side project, returns can meaningfully outperform with leverage. If you use strategies like house hacking, living in one unit while renting out the others, you can drive your own housing costs to nearly zero while building equity. The stock market can't do that. And if you understand the 1031 exchange, you can grow your real estate portfolio tax-deferred in ways stock investors can't replicate without retirement accounts. Real estate is not a bad investment, folks. It's a misunderstood one. Luke and Oscar both walked away from that decision thinking they made the smart move, but neither of them actually sat down and figured out what that path would cost over 10 or 20 years in dollars, in time, in stress, and in risk. The real trap isn't real estate and it isn't stocks. The real trap is choosing one over the other based on a YouTube title, a podcast clip, or something your uncle said at Thanksgiving without ever running the actual numbers for your own situation. And if you're wondering what happens when you do both own property and invest in the market at the same time, that's an entirely different conversation, and the math might change everything you thought you knew. But for now, the next time someone tells you real estate always wins or the stock market always wins, ask them one question: did you include everything? because the answer that includes everything is the only answer that matters. Take care of yourselves, folks.